Somewhere along the line, hard work stopped being about contribution and became a moral cover for greed. Billionaires hoard, workers struggle, and politicians quote scripture to justify cruelty. It's time to challenge the myth that wealth equals virtue, and remember that fairness, empathy, and integrity, not blind productivity, are what make work truly meaningful. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these weekly presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper into something that came up during the main episode. You've probably heard the phrase, "If you don't work, you don't eat." It's a verse pulled from the Bible, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, and it has been used for centuries to moralize about poverty. But in modern America, that line has become more than just scripture. It's practically an economic doctrine. Somewhere along the line, it got twisted into the idea that wealth equals virtue, and that if you're struggling, well, it must be your own damn fault. The idea started as a theological concept. Early Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin emphasized hard work, discipline, and frugality as signs of good moral character. Work wasn't just how you survived, it was how you proved your righteousness. Centuries later, that evolved into what sociologist Max Weber famously called the Protestant Work Ethic. So in this episode of Afterthoughts, I want to explore how that mindset, how that Protestant work ethic became the moral cover story for greed. Now, this idea that became known as the Protestant work ethic may have once helped people find purpose in their labor, even when that labor was mundane or repetitious, but it eventually became something else. A convenient way to judge other people. If success was a sign of divine favor, then wealth meant you were blessed, and poverty meant that you had somehow failed. This is also the root of what we now call the gospel of greed. It's no accident that so many of the wealthiest Americans, especially conservative politicians and CEOs, speak about capitalism as though it were sacred scripture. They even go so far as to twist scripture so they can claim that Jesus was a capitalist, and they scream blasphemy whenever anyone points out or even suggests that the things Jesus allegedly said sound a lot more like socialism. It's because they've turned work and wealth into moral indicators. And the result has been catastrophic for things like empathy, fairness, and even truth. Back in the 1980s, economists were saying something that sounds almost utopian today. They predicted, back in the 1980s, economists predicted that by the 2000s, thanks to massive productivity gains from technology and automation and process improvements, a full-time job earning a living wage would mean working 20 or 30 hours a week, with longer weekends and more leisure time. And they weren't wrong about the productivity. American workers are now more efficient than ever before, producing more value per hour than at any time in history. But the wealth from that efficiency didn't flow to the people creating it. It didn't flow to the people actually doing the work. It flowed up. And instead of sharing those gains, corporations pocketed them. CEOs saw their pay multiply 300 times faster than their workers' wages. The top 1% capture more than 90% of income growth during that time period. So while workers became more productive, the rewards for that productivity went to the people who already had the most. The work ethic stayed, but the fairness disappeared. Now let's talk about that verse again. When Paul said, "Anyone unwilling to work should not eat," he was addressing a small community where some members were refusing to contribute, expecting others to carry them while they waited for the world to end. It was a message about shared responsibility. It wasn't a message about punishing people who were unable to work. But in America today, that same verse is used by Christian nationalists and right-wing politicians to justify cruelty. They invoke that verse while they're cutting SNAP benefits or opposing social programs. They call people lazy who are simply trying to survive in a rigged system. Here's the truth. A third of SNAP recipients are children. And the majority of adults who receive benefits are working, sometimes more than one job. They're just not being paid a living wage. That's not laziness. That's exploitation. Look, if billionaires truly earned their wealth, everyone who works for them should be doing just as well. But they're not. Because billionaires don't create wealth. They extract it. We like to talk about poverty as an individual problem. Make better choices. Work harder. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Get a job, you bum. But it's not just about individual choices. It's also about systems that were designed to keep certain people down. Take redlining. Government-backed housing discrimination that, for decades, denied black families the ability to buy homes in white neighborhoods. That single policy stripped generations of black Americans of the chance to build wealth through home ownership. Meanwhile, white families accumulated trillions of dollars in generational wealth, much of which still shapes the racial wealth gap today. Or consider how healthcare, education, and housing in America are still treated as commodities, not as human rights. Commodities that are accessible to the highest bidder. Why can't the richest nation in the history of the world ensure adequate food, housing, and healthcare for everyone? Guess what? The answer is painfully simple. Greed. Greed, cloaked in moral language, is still greed. It's just a little harder to spot when it wears a halo. Here's another truth. Redistribution policies wouldn't even be necessary if wealth were distributed equitably in the first place. But fairness doesn't just happen naturally. It has to be designed, defended, and demanded. The real moral crisis in America isn't laziness. The real moral crisis in America is the hoarding of wealth and power. The real moral crisis is billionaires building rocket ships while millions of families skip meals. It's corporations buying back stock instead of paying livable wages. And it's politicians quoting scripture to justify cutting programs that feed children. If we truly believed in the sacredness of work, then every worker, every teacher, every nurse, every janitor, every warehouse worker, every farmhand, if we believed in the sacredness of work, every worker would have the dignity of a secure, stable life. The problem isn't that people don't want to work. It's that our system doesn't want to share. So what does this have to do with our foundational values? Well, first, this is about fairness, ensuring that effort and reward are in balance. But it's also about empathy, understanding that we rise and fall together. That's how it's always been. That's how we clawed our way to the top of the food chain. And it's also about integrity, being honest about the fact that poverty is not a moral failure. And wealth is definitely not a sign of virtue. When we let greed disguise itself as godliness, we destroy trust, we divide communities, and we devalue humanity itself. But the antidote to greed isn't guilt. It's gratitude and shared responsibility. It's realizing that when people thrive together, everyone's life gets richer, not just the wealthy few at the top. The gospel of greed says, work harder, take more, hoard what you can. But the human gospel, if you will, the one that's rooted in fairness, empathy, and integrity, the human gospel says something much simpler. Do your part, take what you need, and help others do the same. Do your part, take what you need, and help others do the same. So here's your challenge. Look at the systems you're part of, your workplace, your community, even your daily habits, and ask yourself, am I contributing to shared well-being or just survival for myself? Because the world doesn't need more billionaires. It needs more builders of fairness. And that starts with each of us. If the message in this episode of Afterthoughts resonates with you, please share this episode and talk about it. Ask people what hard work really means to them, because until we redefine work, worth, and wealth, greed is going to keep on winning. And that's a gospel none of us can afford to believe in. All right, thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and I'll keep you updated on the weekly live streams of Mythologizing the Bible. If you do subscribe for free over at the Coda Project, you'll start receiving my publication called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because it includes discussion questions designed for each age group. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to the Guide to Kitchen Table Activism, which is a detailed resource designed to help you be politically active from your own home. The guide explains why activism is important, the philosophy behind kitchen table activism, and the foundational values it supports, before laying out how to use the tools you have to make your voice heard. It provides tools, tactics, and templates for you to use, and it only takes 15 minutes a week. If you care about our democracy, our country, and our world, then I encourage you to check it out. While you're at it, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you'll start receiving my new upcoming newsletter called The Kitchen Table Activist. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.